Well, as Donald Trump and his Republican backers are proving so clearly, misperceptions about contentious issues in politics are very persistent and difficult to correct. That's the focus of a new paper by our next guest, political scientist Brendan Nyhan. And the Dartmouth professor joins us now. Brendan, the New York Times' Max Fisher wrote a piece last week that quoted a lot from your recent paper in Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, in which you asked, why are misperceptions about contentious issues in politics and science seemingly so persistent and difficult to correct? It's not for want of good information, which is ubiquitous. Exposure to good information does not reliably instill accurate beliefs anyway. Rather, a growing body of evidence suggests that the ultimate culprits are cognitive and memory limitations, directional motivations to defend or support some group identity or existing belief, and messages from other people and political elites.
So, Brendan, while I was reading this story, and it's something that I grapple with all the time because so many of my friends still, who again have advanced degrees, just will say, "Oh, COVID, it's just like the flu. 500,000 people haven't died from COVID. Doctors get paid more if they put COVID on it." All of these things, and I'm sitting there reading. I read the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, and I'm looking at this information, and I almost sometimes fall into despair for my friends and loved ones. And I say, how could they be doing this? It's right here. And then I always stop and say the same thing. Oh, my God, they're not reading the Wall Street Journal. They're not reading the Financial Times. They're on Facebook, and they're sending posts, lies, scam documentaries like Plandemic to each other, and that's their world. They never get the facts.
That's right. A lot of people don't follow the news as closely as you do, Joe. I mean, that's, something that's important to remember when you're watching a show like this is that, most people don't follow politics closely and they don't follow science news closely. And in that context, it's easy to be misled. There's good news here, too. More and more research shows that when we give people accurate factual information, it does help them come to form more accurate factual beliefs. So efforts to fact check can work. The problem is they often struggle to overcome elite messages, whether it's on issues like climate or the legitimacy of our elections, right? That all the other information people are getting, whether it's through social media, whether it's through politicians, whether it's through people they know, that seems to often overwhelm the information we might like them to know. And that puts us in a really dangerous position when it comes to, for instance, a global pandemic or a president who refuses to accept the legitimacy of an election, right? In both of those cases, the kinds of vulnerabilities that we all have as human beings to misinformation can be, dangerous. They're dangerous vulnerabilities of our system. And it's up to all of us to figure out how we can best at least limit the potential downsides, the dangers, right? We'll always be human beings, but there are ways that we can do better and that we can try to at least prevent the worst from happening.
Elizabeth Pugh Miller's with us and has a question for you, Brendan. Elizabeth?
Yeah, I was curious, what was so I don't say interesting, but one of the aspects of the January 6th riot was there were a number of veterans, military veterans in that group. And I know you've written about this, but, I think many of them were looking for a cause larger than themselves. They had been in the military, and that's one of the things that you get out of being in the military, especially if you're in a war zone, the sense of belonging, the sense of, tense group dynamics. And do you think that was a factor in what was going on in the riot, among many other things?
I do. I think group identity is a really powerful force when it comes to what people believe. One of the concerns that social scientists have is that partisan identity has become such a powerful motivating force for people, when it comes to how we think about politics. And in that context, people may be more vulnerable to misinformation that appeals to those identities. And in the extreme cases, it may actually motivate people to take action in the world. And this is one of the most challenging aspects of misinformation is even if most people don't take it as literally as we might fear, some do. And even if it's a small percentage, that can be dangerous, right? As we saw on January 6th, right? People can be inspired to act on those claims. And the worry is that going forward, that more people will do that, right? We still have ongoing efforts, for instance, to challenge the legitimacy of the election in Arizona. So I think the struggle here is going to be how we limit these downsides while respecting the very important traditions of freedom of speech in this country. Right? Not demanding that Facebook becomes a global truth police, but at the same time taking seriously the ways that misinformation can do real damage in our politics and to public health.
Willie, following up on what Elizabeth said, yes, it was very concerning that there were a lot of veterans in the January the 6th riots and insurrection. Also concerning is that if you look at vax hesitancy, there are a large number of active duty military men and women who are vaccine hesitant and who are not taking the vaccination, which again suggests a disturbing trend inside our armed forces.
Yeah, there is, and in police departments too. If you look at the statistics about who will and will not get vaccinated, it's something to look at and keep an eye on. Brendan, I'm curious, as Joe mentioned, Facebook, what to do there. I mean, none of this happens in a vacuum. And 20 years ago, these kind of conspiracy theories, we would get emails from people, or they'd talk to people in their neighborhood, but now they found community, and they found so much community that on January 6th, they gathered on a date certain at the Capitol and attacked the Capitol of the United States and tried to overturn a presidential election. So there's been a lot of talk in Congress about how to handle Facebook. What is a reasonable expectation, first, of how Facebook might police itself, and second, of what Congress might do to do something about Facebook and all that it reaps on this, on the havoc it wreaks on, people gathering for nefarious reasons?
That's a $1 million question, Willie. I don't think anyone knows the answer, and I see a lot of kind of glib claims about if we repealed Section 230, these problems would magically go away. I don't think that's the case. That's a very complicated policy question that won't obviously help. But we do need to take seriously the ways that people can coordinate online, the way they can use the tools of social media platforms like Facebook to mobilize people not just to spread misinformation, but to take action based on that misinformation. So there was a leak you may have seen of an internal Facebook report on what happened prior to January 6th that talked about how these Stop the Steal groups overwhelmed Facebook's internal protections against efforts to engage in harmful actions in the outside world, right? That they were following a rule book that couldn't keep up with how fast things were moving. And in that context, we do need to think, we need to at least be ready to take action quickly. The people at these platforms have to be ready to think about taking different kinds of measures when circumstances become dire. There's no easy public policy solution to that problem. But ultimately, some of these questions are political ones. The Stop the Steal group was organized on Facebook, and that's how that process gained critical mass in part. But ultimately, it was rallying to the cry of a political leader, and a political leader was inspiring people to take that kind of action, right? And the point that I tried to make in my piece was that misinformation so often is inspired by political elites who call on their followers to ignore other pieces of information they might see and support this misinformation that's being put forward. And that's unfortunately the situation we find ourselves in. And it's the situation we find ourselves in even after January 6th, even after Trump's defeat, both of which people thought would exhaust him as a political force in this country, right? The misinformation that he's promoted shows us just how difficult it is to counter these forces, because you would think that would be enough. You would think that would have, driven the nails into the coffin of these kinds of political lies. But instead, we're seeing the Republican Party organize around the idea that the 2020 election was wrongly decided. And that's incredibly discouraging. And again, it's not going to be the last time that this happens. So we have to figure out better ways to do this and better ways to create political consequences and to encourage people to cross party lines the way brave Republicans like Mitt Romney and Liz Cheney have.
Hey, thanks so much for watching our YouTube channel. You can follow up on today's top stories and breaking news, or catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.